if you get remarried and you just leave it all to your new spouse, well, they could then take the assets, use them, and then change the beneficiaries. They direct it. They could leave it to just their children. Maybe they're not close with your children. Right. And now you just disinherited your children unintentionally, and we hope that the intention is there, but it's very clear to put it on paper.
Welcome to a Wiser Retirement Podcast, where we believe the best financial advice should always be conflict-free. I'm your host, Casey Smith, guiding you to financial freedom. Today is my co-host, Shawna Theriault. Hi, Shawna.
Hi.
Welcome back.
Welcome back to you.
Yes, I'm saying welcome back to you. I'm glad to be back, I guess. I was been out for...
You were out. So Missy and I had the show last week.
You did. And I need to go back and listen to that one, make sure that
it was pretty good.
Everything was everything was done to my specifications.
Right.
Just kidding.
Your instructions that you left.
People tell me that it was great.
Good.
So
glad to hear it.
Glad you guys could toe the line for me.
Absolutely.
It's hard to do these things when you're traveling remote and don't know what the internet's going to be like. So
and the sound and
yeah, I know. Yeah,
that too.
Yeah, but I had a good couple of weeks. So I wish it was a vacation for me. It was a little bit of one. Our 12-year-old was up in Cooperstown playing baseball for a week. They have a big Cooperstown Dream Park, and you can only do it when you're 12.
Oh.
So it's only for 12-year-olds, and you find a local team that gets a ticket to go. And so we found a team. If it just so happens, our hometown here in Marietta has started a baseball club. And the 12-year-old team got a ticket to Cooperstown.
That's
so there
exciting.
were 94 teams in Cooperstown at the Dreams Park.
Wow.
The kids stay in barracks. So with their coaches. And when they're not playing baseball, we played 7 games over 4 days.
Oh gosh.
And when they're not playing that, they're either trading pins or we had a custom pin made just for the team. And I think Owen ended up with 90 pins. He couldn't find 4 teams.
Oh, wow. That's so
he went
fun.
with 100 pins, and he's trying to trade to get all the teams. Or they're playing wiffle ball. They have this huge wiffle ball area, just big fields, all it is.
What memories that was.
So it was neat. We took the entire family up to New York for a couple of days, made me appreciate grass and driving my own car.
Right.
But he'd never been. So we did a couple of touristy things up there. So we had the whole front part of a Delta plane with just our family, and friends. So my daughter took her friend, and then Ethan took his girlfriend, my oldest son. So there were 7 of us, 3 hotel rooms, and only Uber XLs.
Wow.
All around New York for 3 days. So that was fun. I did get to eat at Danny Meyer's restaurant.
Oh.
Danny Meyer's wrote a book called Setting the Table. It's a lot of how we engage customer service here at our firm. And so I always love going to his restaurant, just how you book the reservation, the communication from their team to you before you eat, reasonable New York prices. You don't have to get super dressed up, but it's a great experience. That's my second time eating there. And we got, he's the guy who created Shake Shack. That's probably what people would know him more for that than that restaurant there. And then after we got home, I turned around the next day and drove my daughter up to Maryland with her horse.
How long of a drive is that?
That was 12 hours. So,
with a horse.
With a horse. So yeah, we left at 4:30 in the morning and got there around dinner time. So
wow.
But yeah, it was kind of 2 highs. Owen did really well. He batted 18 times. He got a hit 15 of the 18, and he hit 3 home runs, which is really cool.
That is cool.
To be able to do that at Cooperstown. And then Caitlin did really well with her horse Henry, and she won the bronze medal for eventing. So how this format was, it's called the Young Riders, and there's 5 regions from different parts of the country. And the South region selected her and 3 other young ladies to represent the South.
Wow.
So we came from Georgia, but the rest of the team had come from Florida, actually. So they had further to drive. But their get-ups were a lot different. They had these huge trailers with living quarters on them. So they just drive up, set up, they got their own hotel there. I'm not a big camper, so that would be Caitlin's dream. That'd be my worst nightmare. But no, she did really well. So she's everybody's back home. Actually, Owen's back at camp now. And then while all that was happening last week, my son played in a golf tournament down in St. Simon. So it's
all over.
Yeah, that's just kind of my life right now. And I'm very fortunate to have you and all the other people here at Wiser to keep this place running even when I'm not here. So it's been great to watch them excel at what they're at, what they're really good at, or what they're passionate about. But
absolutely.
So yeah, someone captured this picture of me giving her a high five and then later hugging her after the round. And I was trying not to cry. And that picture is now all over the internet.
Aww.
So it's kind of embarrassing.
No, it's not. That's sweet.
I just love setting goals and I love achieving goals. And that's something I've tried to instill in my kids is every year I sit them down and I'm like, okay, what are your goals this year for what you do?
Yeah.
And her goal was to go to Young Riders and place. And
she did it.
She did it. It was close. I mean, all the girls were separated by fractions of a point. So it was a nail biter at the end,
which makes it even more exciting.
She pulled it through. She dropped one rail in stadium and I was like, oh no. And then I looked down at the scoreboard real quick and it's like, okay, she could drop a rail. We had a rail. We could drop one rail, but she hadn't dropped a rail. She'd been in second. And the conditions were horrible. Like, it hadn't rained in there a really long time. So on the cross country phase where they run through these big fields, the horses weren't getting a whole lot of traction. So we had, I think it was 3 girls fall off during the round. You're eliminated when that happens. But she's a great rider. She navigated through the hardest part very carefully and sped up through the easier sections. And it was only 2 seconds late, I think. So that's not a big deal for the conditions it was in. So anyway,
there's nothing like watching your kids accelerate at what they do well. It's just really incredible. And looking at my daughters are competitive cheerleaders and watching them do things like that. I never did things like that.
Right.
I can't do that with my body. And just watching them accelerate and push themselves in really strenuous ways. It's amazing.
Well, I think while I was gone, your daughter secured a modeling contract, right?
She did. One of my middle daughter for varsity cheer. She's going to be one of their models for the year, chosen for the year. So
that's cool.
Yeah, that's pretty exciting too.
So you go to New York for that?
I don't know yet. They will be travel.
I was about to say, you probably want to figure out where you got to go. This stuff is hard. All this stuff's hardcore and expensive, it seems like.
It is. But it's worth it to watch them accelerate like that and have those opportunities. It's really exciting.
I hope that for all the kids that are excelling in these sports, I hope all this transfers. I mean, the chances of them statistically being professionals at what they're doing are very small. So not expecting that, but certainly understanding hard work, setting goals, and doing all the things that getting through the tough spots.
Oh yeah,
because that's how life is. We got to get through the tough spot.
Are you curious why annuities keep coming up as a potential investment option? People are often told that annuities can effectively mitigate investment risks and help secure their financial future. However, annuities often benefit the salesperson and might not be the best choice for you as a consumer. To learn more about the various types of annuities, the negatives of owning them, and better investment alternatives, we have a free ebook on our website just for you. To download our ebook, Buyer Beware, Why Do They Keep Trying to Sell You That Annuity? Simply click the link in the episode notes or visit wiserinvestor.com/guides. Now let's get back to the episode.
So anyway, let's get to today's topic, second marriages and blended families, how all that affects estate planning. So you and I both have had 20 plus years.
It is
of working with families. And I will say that blended families can be simple and they can also get very complicated. And I feel like we've even had situations where blended families had been together for 30 years and it was still very complicated in how to handle assets, especially when two sides don't like each other. Kids.
Oh, yeah.
Parents are in love. Kids hate each other.
Yeah, that's hard.
So that creates a lot of problems. And so we'll dive into that. But first of all, why don't let's just define estate planning. I never know the people who listen to the show. I never know, what their education level is. But when you say estate planning, what is that? What should that mean to somebody?
So what I think of when I think of estate planning, it is how the assets will be distributed or divided after you pass away. Okay. And so it's looking at all of your assets and how will that be divided. But it's not also just when you pass away. I also cluster the powers of attorney with estate planning. So financial powers of attorney and healthcare powers of attorney. And those are enforced when you're still alive. The will dictates what happens when you pass away. So those three documents, if you will, the will, financial powers of attorney, healthcare powers of attorney, those are the three main documents. Now there could be trust documents and other things like that that accompany the will and full estate plan, but it's really looking at your whole asset situation and how that's going to flow when something happens, either financially, health-wise, how that's going to be distributed out or retitled, et cetera.
Right. And so just touch on that trust for a second. So typically, if you add a trust to the will just says, hey, I have a trust. Please place everything inside the trust.
There's a couple. Right? Yes. There's a couple different variations of that. So you could have a trust that you establish today. That is a trust that is set up. That's a revocable living trust,
which is typical.
And you could have a will that directs everything into that living trust. And that trust is currently alive, if you will, for lack of a better word. There are some trusts that are only created in the will when somebody passes away. Those are testamentary trusts. Yep. And so that's two different things. And a lot of times, you can use both in the situation of second marriages. And I can explain that whenever you get to that point. But, so there could be a trust that's here now while you're alive, but any trust that's created in your will when you pass away, those are not even created yet until the start date of the trust is the date you pass away.
Right. So the will is for probate, and a trust can skip probate. You can still choose to probate your estate for various reasons, when that's a more advanced estate planning conversation. But the will is for probate. So if you want to keep your assets out of probate, you can do that by simply creating a revocable living trust.
Yes.
Which is now controlling. So when you pass away, because your assets get titled into that trust. So when you pass away, you don't have to go through that probate process at all. That's really the only advantage. And you could add some additional things in there, potentially, like, if you have one child that you feel like is going to beat everybody else to death, you can say, hey, if you fight this, then if you fight with your siblings, you get nothing. There's different poison pills you can
poison pills
you can put in here.
So probate in Georgia is actually, and we may have listeners all over the country, we're in Georgia. So, probate in Georgia is actually pretty simple.
It is.
Now, it's still open to public record. You still have to file things. It's very easy. Probate in Florida is very challenging. So you will see a ton of revocable living trusts in Florida.
So Florida, Texas, Nevada, California, those are all states that have known for difficult probate, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, you would have, and if you have assets in multiple states.
Yes, correct. Because what happens, especially real property, now it just depends on if you're renting it. That's a whole nother show. You may want to title it differently than a revocable trust, but that is a way to avoid probate, because if you have homes here and then in various states, different real property, you have to probate each state.
Right.
So if you have property in another state, so you can title them in a way to avoid that probate. But when it comes to second marriages,
yes.
So when it comes to second marriages, this is where titling of the assets matters and the estate plan matters. And so it really starts with what is it you're wanting to do? So if you want to ensure that you are not disinheriting your children from a previous marriage, because many times when we get married, remarried, we both have children from previous marriages, like you said,
right.
And they may or may not like each other. And so agreeing with your spouse up front, how you want this to be distributed when each other passes. Because if you get remarried and you just leave it all to your new spouse, well, they could then take the assets, use them, and then change the beneficiaries. They could leave it to just their children. Maybe they're not close with your children.
Right.
And now you just disinherited your children unintentionally, and we hope that the intention is there, but it's very clear to put it on paper. So that way,
And that's where a lot of lawsuits come from.
Yeah.
Is disinherited children.
Yeah.
Right.
And most of the time it's unintentional. It's not intentionally, it's just the way that the titling happens.
Correct.
So, I've seen before, it says, my will says that I want my portion to go to my children, but then they have everything titled to a joint account.
Yeah.
Well, what happens in that is that everything passes to the surviving spouse, and then they dictate where that goes. And so a way to avoid that, titling matters, putting it in individual name. You can do a revocable trust and title it that way so that the trust assets dictate where it goes. But if you have a brokerage account or bank account in individual name, you can set up a trust in your will. That is a testamentary trust. That means it's set up in your will to say, okay, I want my spouse to be able to use this during his or her lifetime. So that way they're taken care of, they have access to it, but this is how I want it distributed when they pass away.
Yeah.
And it may be to all the children, it could be to hers and mine or whatever,
Right.
It really just depends on the family dynamics. So that is a trust is a way to dictate how that happens when you pass away.
And it's harder to do that inside the will.
I mean, you can do it inside the will, but you have to make sure the assets are going through the will because retirement accounts don't.
Yeah, that's true.
So, I mean, a lot of people have wealth in their retirement accounts. And so, you really have to, plan for that. And most of the time you just leave it to your spouse.
You'd want the retirement account to match what the will says, but it's really hard to do that if it gets complicated.
It
only
is.
give you like 3 or 4 blanks. So you'd have to leave it to the estate of in your IRA, which is now going to make it taxable.
But yes, and there's ways to do that with an attorney. And I'm not an attorney, you're not an attorney.
Right.
We know enough to be dangerous and definitely do this with an attorney, but you can do an exhibit where it says, here's how I want it left. And it's an attachment. Most custodians will take that. Some don't. So you can do that to figure out a way to have that titling so that your spouse can have access to that, but then it gets distributed differently, potentially. So that's something to think about. Because otherwise, if you just leave everything to the surviving spouse, then they dictate. Now, there's several spouses that will, distribute it all to the kids and there's no issue. And that was the plan, but they don't have to.
Yeah. And I think it gets more complicated too when if you have younger children. And so, chances are that you're not going to, when you remarried, your spouse is not going to have custody of those kids. It's going to go back to the birth parent, right? So if it goes back to the birth parent, if all your assets have gone to the spouse, what obligation does she have to even help those kids?
Yeah.
I mean, now you're putting your ex-spouse in a position where she may have to use legal tactics to try to get support.
Yeah.
Potentially.
Yeah.
So it can get really messy. So you have to kind of think about these things. And sometimes you don't want the ex-spouse controlling the money. So you do need to find someone to kind of hold the assets and say, this is for my kids. This is for their health care, their education, their well-being. Right.
Yeah.
So it gets complicated. Most people do nothing.
Okay. Right.
They have a will. They're angry. They got divorced. They have a will that redirects everything to the new spouse or maybe to the kids.
Mm-hmm.
But then you leave, now you're remarried. Now the new spouse doesn't have a house to live in, doesn't, it just gets complicated.
It does. Yeah.
So the thing to do is say, I'm not here, sit down, you draw out what you think you want that world to look like. And then when you sit down with the estate planning attorney, they can bring the tools in necessary to make that
100%. That is the best thing to do, is to get a balance sheet saying, okay, here's how everything is titled. How should it be titled? This is what I would want to happen. So that way they can actually picture the flow of it. And then they can write the documents accordingly and give you attachments to retirement accounts if needed, and et cetera, et cetera.
And I think when you're building that, if you want to talk about considerations, you do have to balance the need of your current spouse versus, maybe even their children and what your children might need.
Yeah.
What if something happened to both of you? Right.
Right.
So you need to figure out what that looks like. Obviously when they're little, it's very different. I feel like when they're grown.
Yeah.
So there's different versions of estate planning, and typically when your kids are now adults, then you can make changes. Also, we know state of Georgia really well, but the other states that you're in, you may need to look at what the considerations are for that particular state.
Yeah, absolutely.
What's actually allowed. I think switching gears for a minute, we just had a podcast recently on prenups.
That was a good one.
And it, going into a second marriage, I could see why you might want to do a prenup. Because you've already had to fight for resources, most likely, right?
Yeah.
So how are we gonna, if this marriage doesn't work out, how do we kind of reset things back to where they should be?
Yeah.
But I think once you're married and you die, the prenup doesn't have.
It doesn't have any bearing. I would think it didn't. I would think it wouldn't. Right. Then it would dictate the will.
Specifically in there. Which
right.
probably people aren't thinking about. And that's not the vehicle you'd want to use for that anyway, because I don't know how that would come into effect in the probate court. But you definitely want to be able to have an exit strategy, which I think a prenup can help you with. But after that, you're going to want to have all this estate planning set up.
Yeah.
So anyway, I think, where do we start? So we know we need to make changes. What's the first thing we do?
I would say the first thing is to understand where that, and I can't stress it enough. I know I've said it like 3 times, that how the assets are titled matters and where it's at. Because I've had so many people come to me and say, "Oh, well, I'm good. I have a will. It's no problem." And all their assets are in retirement accounts, and it doesn't even pass that way. So understanding where it is, so looking at a balance sheet and the titling of that, how you would want it to flow, and understanding, are there enough assets to do what you want to do? Meaning, if you do have younger children, is there enough assets there to take care of the demands of your, maybe your divorce decree from before? So sometimes there's, life insurance set up for that. But also, just understanding all the flows of where it's going to go, and is there enough assets there to make sure that your spouse doesn't have a change in lifestyle, if that is your goal. And what are the other considerations? So just looking at, do you have enough assets and life insurance to help with that, and how everything is titled, and then going to an estate planning attorney and saying, this is how I would want it to go. I want to make sure, or not ensure, just depends, that my children are not disinherited, et cetera. How should we structure this? And going with the recommendation of your attorney.
Yeah. Something else you might consider as you're looking at this is, who's going to settle it? You have some adversarial parties potentially.
Yeah.
And that's where you might consider a third party to settle the estate. So
yeah.
It could be a family friend, if you want to do that to them.
A sibling, as your sibling.
Could be a potential sibling. Yeah. If the estate is worth enough, there are companies out there that's all they do is settle estates and monitor estates. Cumberland Trust comes to mind.
Yeah. You can have corporate trustees.
Banks will do that. I'd say you'd have to have a lot of money.
Yeah.
For a bank. They're ridiculously expensive.
Yeah.
Probably 20, 30 million plus, if I had to guess. I mean, I've seen it done with less, but they chew up the
all the money. Right. Exactly. It's a high percentage for sure.
Very high percentage.
Yeah.
people like Cumberland Trust, I think they charge like a 2% fee. That's what they normally charge. So that's much more reasonable. But yeah, I think that the takeaway here is we just have to focus on what your intentions are, get those written down, and then probably every 5 years, pull up that document and do a deep dive into it again.
Unless something changes in between, of course.
Correct.
Yeah.
Any big changes.
Absolutely. And sometimes you don't have to create all the fancy stuff. I mean, I've seen spouses where they were like, well, this is money that I've created in my lifetime, and I want to spend it with my spouse. And if there's anything left for the children, great.
Yep.
So, their goal is not to leave money to the children. It is
adult
just
children. Yes, I could see
correct.
that.
Correct. Right. And so, it's really up to you how you want to handle it. It's completely your money. It's your funds. It is a lot cleaner if it is drawn out and knows exactly how things are supposed to flow.
Right.
For your heirs and honestly the surviving spouse too. So they're not forced making these weird decisions that are really challenging.
I think a letter to go on top of it all is always good to say, these are my intentions. But also, if you have adult children, talking this through with adult children, I think is very important.
Yeah.
Because you don't want is they have expectations in their mind of how much money that they might be getting, or they would be getting something. They may not even care about it, but their assumption is they're going to get something.
Right.
And when they find out that they didn't, that it went to new wife, and new wife redirected it all to her kids.
Yeah.
That creates a lot of problems, and it usually ends up in court.
Yeah.
So we have clients, widows in that situation now that I think could get contentious potentially.
Yeah.
And some of the things that I've seen them do don't. It's good. I know both sides, so I'm like, I didn't think you're that selfish of a person, but you're acting like you are, that you'd be willing to put her out of her house.
I know, it breaks my heart, honestly, the things that I've seen, because, when you're sitting across the table from a client, they're like, oh, my kids would never do that.
Yeah,
and then they go
when you're gone
and you're sitting across the table from the kids, and it's a completely different.
I've learned that when the dominant person in the family passes away, there's complete chaos almost every situation until someone else emerges as, I am now
the leader,
head leader of this family. Some do it in more passive ways, but it's happening every single time.
Yeah.
So that anyway, that's something that you need to try to take into account and set the ground rules. You're not going to control things from the grave, but you got to kind of set the tone and say, these are my expectations after I'm gone.
Yeah.
And you do that through good estate planning, and you do that with a letter on top to kind of maybe telling your story and what your thoughts were, and leave your last wishes and your last I love yous in that letter.
Mm-hmm.
And I've only seen that a couple of times, but it really seemed to calm the situation down.
Yeah. It's almost talking from
from
afar. Right. Exactly. I know. And
Exactly.
it's something to keep in mind too. I've seen it many times where they did pick one of the siblings to lead the family, if you will, and put them in that role to be the financial power of attorney and eventually the executor. And I've seen when, a client has started getting dementia and that family member was then leading, and the other siblings were squabbling or not agreeing with what that person was doing. It was like, always remember, and I was told this once by an attorney, always remember that there's a reason that person, that client put that child in charge of this.
Yeah.
And, it could be chaotic and maybe everyone's not agreeing with what they're doing, but they're doing the right thing, and that. And so just never question that, because they obviously know their child better than you, Right. I mean, obviously, unless there's something nefarious going on, and that wasn't the case, but it's just interesting to see, because they almost appoint leaders, thinking about your children and who you would put in charge. Just, it's better to have one person versus 2 or 3 people fighting and not agreeing in that case too. So,
well, also too, though, I've seen the creation side of it, and people go, well, I have to pick my oldest because he would be really upset if I didn't pick him. But really, my middle child's really good at this.
I say pick your middle child.
I say pick the middle child. And
That's
you have
right.
a conversation with everybody, and this is why I've chosen it. And I think this will be better for everyone. you've talked about it, and that's, I don't know, maybe that's being a Southerner. We have a hard time.
Well, I feel like that's changed a little bit. I feel like people are a little more open to talk about money than they were years and years ago,
sure.
And being open and transparent about that.
Well, especially too with older people and the fraud that's been going on.
Yes.
And they have friends that have been taken advantage of.
Yeah.
And now with the internet, you can't do things easily.
Right.
If you're, older.
Yeah,
you
exactly. You have to ask your kids. I ask my kids now, and I'm only in my 40s. I'm like, wait, what are we doing on this?
Exactly.
I have seen a couple times too, and it seemed to work, at least in these situations. It really depends again on the family dynamics where, something happens to you, you make the surviving spouse and your one child or one of the children the trustee together on the spouse's trust that is for their benefit until, you know what I mean? Yeah. So that way
there is checks and balances.
Yes. And where, the child, of course, hopefully you trust all your children, but the one that you designated is in charge along with your spouse. And so they're working hopefully together in tandem in that situation so that both parties win.
Yeah, true.
If the family dynamics are such that would be okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think our takeaways here are: 1, review the current situation. Maybe even start with, this is what I would do today. No legalese, just write it down. And then review what you got. If you got nothing, you gotta go get something. Right. But look at where you are right now. And then from there, I would consult with your financial advisor and the attorney. The attorney's there to create the legal documents. But financial advisors are really good at piecing it all together. Because many times I've walked clients through this process, and the attorney does something that's going to create a taxable situation.
Right.
And all you have to say is, you can't do that here.
Yeah. But can we do it over here?
But yes, we can do this over here. So that's the importance of a financial advisor, is connecting the CPA, the attorney, and then the overall family strategy and blending that together. That's what a good financial advisor does.
Right.
The bad financial advisors are the ones that are just trying to sell you the products and say they can help you with this stuff, but then they tell you, we're not attorneys and we're not CPAs. Those are the ones that you're not really getting advice from. You're just getting sold products.
Right.
Or there are a lot of financial advisors that all they do is manage assets. They really aren't financial advisors or asset managers.
Right. And that's only one piece of the pie. Your whole financial picture, it's an important piece, but it's only one piece.
It is, but it can be a very simple piece too if you do it correctly. And a lot of people try to justify their fees by simply saying, look how good I am at asset management, when you can't just be good at asset management. You have to understand the entire picture. That's the difference of a planner and an asset manager. We have an asset manager here in our firm, right? That's Andrew.
Yeah.
The king of data.
Right.
So we have Andrew, but the rest of us are planners, and that's what makes all this work.
Yeah. And then we bring in attorneys and CPAs as needed.
We have the best attorneys here in town and CPA. We're really grateful for those relationships. Okay. So, couple of things. Thanks for listening to today's episode. If you're interested in learning more about Wiser Wealth Management, you can schedule a consultation by going to wiserinvestor.com. You can also click on the episode note link. Episode 230, what can and can't be included in a prenup. Episode 119, choosing a CPA to meet your estate planning needs, or might be a good podcast to go back and listen to. Also, we have a YouTube channel, A Wiser Retirement. That thing's blowing up. We're getting all kinds of views there now. So go there. Maybe start dressing up for these podcasts. Look, you and Missy are always dressed up, not me. I'm always ready to play golf. You should always be ready to play golf.
Always.
Although I think I played like 5 rounds last year. I watched a lot, but didn't get to play. We have a blog, Legacy Planning and Estate Planning, Understanding the Difference. So thanks for listening to the podcast, and we'll see you guys next week.
Thanks for listening to a Wiser Retirement podcast. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. Make sure to subscribe wherever you're listening. That way you don't miss any new episodes. We'd also appreciate if you could leave a rating and review. If you have any questions about anything that was discussed today, head to wiserinvestor.com and reach out. This episode was produced by Rachel Dotson. This podcast is strictly for informational purposes only and is not to be considered as investment advice or solicitation to buy or sell any financial products, securities, digital assets, or any other investment vehicles, or a basis to make any financial decisions. Wiser Wealth Management Incorporated is a registered investor advisor with the SEC. The host and/or guests may personally own securities, digital assets, or other investment vehicles mentioned on this podcast. Neither the host nor guests of the show are compensated for their participation, and no referral fees are paid to or received by any host or guest for clients, listeners, or similar interests. Investments involve risk, and unless otherwise stated, are not guaranteed. Be sure to first consult with a qualified financial advisor, tax professional, insurance professional, and/or legal professional before implementing any strategy discussed herein. Past performance is not indicative of future performance.